Okay, so I'll begin. My name is Syrek. Thanks for coming to my little unconference session. I had the idea for this session back in February because I was tasked by the conference organizers with having to read all of the proposals for the conference and copy edit them. Not everybody is that good at writing, and there are some people for whom English is not their first language. So the committee wanted to review the proposals on as even a footing as possible. So they asked me to revise them so they all more or less sounded the same. And as I was reading through them, I couldn't help but notice that some people could use some help and advice in writing their proposals, and that there are a lot of things that some of them were very good, obviously, many of the ones that were accepted, but a lot of them came across to me as ill-conceived, if not careless. And I spoke to John about this, and he thought it would be a good idea if I did something like this at the conference to help people have a better shot at getting accepted. Why am I a good person to do this? Well, I'm more of a writer and an editor than a developer. I've been a professor of English for 15 years and a teacher for 15 years. I've submitted to conferences, spoken at conferences, not tech conferences. I usually talk about Hamlet, not functional programming. And I've organized panels, and I've read a lot of people's proposals, both good and bad. So these are my observations, and I'm just going to go through them quickly, make some comments, remarks. We'll look at some examples, and then if any of you want to actually work on a piece of writing for an idea, we can make up some toy examples, or if you actually have something, I'm happy to work on that with you, or we can just have general chat. I don't have much more of a plan than that for this. Okay. Number one, this is the most important thing. If I wanted to condense this into a 10-minute Inspire talk, this would be the only slide. Know your audience. This is the one mistake that people writing make. They don't know their audience. They don't think about their audience. They don't have empathy for their audience. Your audience, if you're submitting to a conference, is a panel of people who are tired, and they don't want to have to think too much about what they're reading. They have to read maybe several hundred proposals and then choose from among them. And this is a very difficult choice for them. They need to compose a conference, and they need to select papers that go well together. So they need to know what you're talking about. And if your proposal is not, if you don't submit a good proposal, if you don't make it accessible to them, if you're not communicating well, it's just going to be easy for them to pass on it because they have so many others to read. And it's tiring to have to do this and grueling. So, imagine yourself in the role of a person having to read your proposal. And think, does this make sense to me? Do I know what I'm talking about? Am I actually communicating something? Just feel your audience's, feel for your audience is what I should say. Even if your audience is abstract and you don't know who they are, right? Just imagine what type of audience it is. A panel of people in this situation, how can you reach them best? Pick something. This is another problem that people have frequently in conference proposals. They want to talk about everything, some enormous subject that has any number of possible ramifications, and you could go in any number of different directions. It's always going to feel like you need to talk about more. You need to cover your bases. You can't talk about this without talking about that, or you have a hard time juggling between the general and the specific. For a conference, I would go for specific. It's very difficult to communicate even one idea effectively to an audience in a short period of time. Even if you have 2 hours, I wouldn't go beyond a few specific points, maybe 3 things at best. If you have a shorter talk, 1 thing, a thesis, if you remember that from college writing classes or elsewhere. Have something specific that you're trying to communicate. Pick the one thing that you want to talk about and focus on that. Don't feel the need to give someone a comprehensive introduction to your subject. You can assume for a conference generally some amount of literacy in the subject matter, general literacy anyway. This is hard to being original. You can choose a subject that is not in itself terribly original, but have an original way of presenting it, of communicating that information. In fact, I think that might even be better than trying to imagine some totally new topic that no one's ever heard of before. I mean, I'm used to literature conferences, and generally in my conference, in my world, you present original work at a conference. And in tech conferences, I understand that is not often the case, but that's fine. You just need to present it in a way that is somehow unique. You're offering something. You're not just doing the same subject over again in the same way. And you need to communicate that in your proposal. If you're just writing a proposal that is generic and says, I'm going to talk about this subject in the usual way, I don't think it's going to be very compelling. So for a functional programming conference, you might imagine that we received dozens of proposals on Haskell. And many of them just sort of looked the same. Like they essentially communicated to me, well, I'm going to talk about Haskell for a while. There might have been some particular take on Haskell, but it didn't stand out. And again, I'm not the one who picked any of them to be on the schedule, but as I was reading them, I didn't find them terribly compelling. On the other hand, there were several that were extremely compelling because they identified the specific piece of the Haskell world that they were going to concentrate on, and also the way in which they were going to present that piece. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting to me. I would go to that talk. No one's going to do this because nobody ever does. If you want to submit to LambdaConf for next year, start thinking about what you want to do now, not the deadline of the actual submission process, which is, I think, people are people, and my students, I think, always did their work at 3 a.m. the day before it was due. You're not going to do your best work because you're going to be stressed out, and I don't think you can work. I mean, some people, I work well under pressure. Well, I don't know if that's really true. You might push through to the end under pressure. I don't know if you're producing the best work you possibly can. Give yourself time and space to think about what it is you want to say, and start today with the thought, I would like to present at a conference. And now you have an entire year to get to the finished piece of writing that is going to be your proposal. And it's actually a difficult piece of writing because it's so short. I forget who said, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter, but I didn't have time to write you a short one. That's like the kind of thing that gets ascribed to Mark Twain, but I forget. Does anyone remember who said that?
I know the quote.
You know the quote, yeah. Anyways, the sentiment's important. Who cares who said it? Get started early. I mean, a month in advance is really fine when you find out the proposal process is beginning. Don't do it. Don't fill in the form the day the thing is due, because then people like me have to read that stuff, and it just makes us sad. And I also feel for a lot of these proposals, there could be something here, but like I can't mentally insert into a proposal stuff that is not there just because I'm well disposed to people succeeding. I can tell someone has a good idea, it's just not well presented, but I can't do anything to present it better for them, Even as an editor, there's only so much I can do. I think it's a good idea to brainstorm, and by brainstorm, I don't just mean like stare into space. Actually create like a mind map. I'm a big fan of mind maps or diagrams of any kind. Just write things down. You could do free writing. I'm also a big fan of free writing, where you're not like composing a document for any particular purpose. You're just like writing out your thoughts, and you just keep doing that until somehow an idea coalesces in your mind. And then you can get to that pick one thing aspect, right? There may be a lot of things you could talk about that you'd like to talk about. You just start writing, you start brainstorming, you start connecting the dots, and that will eventually lead you somehow through some mystical process or neurological to the one thing that you really feel like you do want to talk about for the audience that you're going to address, right? I would also recommend that you start writing before you know what you want to say. It's very unlikely you're going to have a complete proposal in your head right immediately from the start. Like, you know exactly what you want. Some people maybe will, professors possibly, because they do have original work, and like, I'm just going to present my work. But even that requires preparation because writing an article is not the same thing as speaking in front of an audience. And you may not know exactly, you have a topic, right, or a general area of interest, but you don't know specifically what you want to hone in on in that topical area. Just start writing about it. Figure out you need to communicate in English, at least here, and you have to get your thoughts therefore into words, right? You're not gonna, your brain doesn't speak English. I mean, maybe you think in English, but you need to actually get that stuff onto paper, onto your screen. Just get it out. Make your thought process actually happen in front of you. Typing, not just in your head. And do it before you know what you want to say. But also you want to iterate on that until you do know what you want to say. You'll get there eventually. Just keep writing flushing all that away, writing again. This doesn't have to take that long. I'm not trying to make it sound tedious. The less you actually think about what you're writing, the less tedious it will be. Most of my students have a problem with their writing because everything they write, they treat as a final draft in their heads, right? This writing really counts, so it has to be perfect. Therefore, it's stressing me out, and therefore, I hate doing this. If you don't think that way, and I think code can be this way too. If you don't think like, oh, this is going to be the final product for like some other audience, like someone's going to look at this and then judge me. If you don't think of it that way, then it takes away a lot of the stress. I mean, certainly for me, everything I write starts as garbage because it's not meant for anybody. It's just part of my process. I'm just, until I get somewhere. Then polish later, Separate these two things. Separate the thinking from the polishing and the presentation part. Do all that thinking stuff first. Worry about honing it into a form for public consumption later. Grow and prune your writing. This kind of advice is applicable to any sort of writing. I know it probably seems a little bit specialized for a conference proposal, but I think it still works, particularly because it's a very small thing that you're trying to do ultimately. So expand on your thoughts and then cut back, right? Expand, cut back. It's like a bonsai tree. You're like crafting this little, nugget of writing that you're going to hand over to somebody. And again, you don't want to think, I need to write, I'm going to start at the beginning, top of the page, I'm going to write to the bottom, and then that's it, I'm done. I said what I'm going to say. Really bad idea. You're not likely to be successful. You're more likely to be successful if your final product reflects the thoughtfulness of the process that you've gone through to produce it. So expand as you continue to think, and then cut back the things that you ultimately go back and decide are superfluous. This is very important for a conference talk. I've seen very few talks in which, and this goes for me too, by the way. All of this is advice I have to give to myself. Given the time frame you are allotted, focus on what you can reasonably achieve. Always assume everything will take longer than you expect. Don't think that you're going to carefully craft a 2-hour presentation or a 45-minute talk or whatever it is and actually fit it into the time. Always assume it's going to take longer. If you have 2 hours, come up with something that you think will take an hour and a half. Then you'll at least you'll have time for questions, if anything else, or for discussion, whatever. Certainly don't bite off more than you can chew, and be obvious about it, because people reading them are going to think, well, this person can't possibly cover this subject in 2 hours. I'm going to give a 2-hour talk in which I introduce the entire Haskell language, from nothing to monads, let's say. Like, I can't do that in 2 hours. I don't know if anybody's that good. Or maybe I could, right? I can just like rush through everything. It's useless. And somebody reading it is going to think that it's useless. So focus on something that is reasonable. And don't think that because you're being reasonable, you don't sound ambitious. I don't really like to see people being ambitious in their talks. Not too ambitious, because what am I going to take away from that? If I can come away from a talk with learning one thing, that's an achievement. One thing's enough for most talks. Workshop is a different story, of course. But don't feel like you need to impress with what you're going to cover. The point is to communicate, not to entertain, not to just be impressive. Aim for being sharp and succinct. This is probably pretty obvious. But use your language like a weapon is what I would say. Craft it. I've seen lots of, I don't know how to put it. Soft language, evasive language that is just, I read it and I don't quite know what they're getting at. I myself can sometimes be ponderous. I'm probably being a little bit ponderous right now. Going back to know your audience, understand that they have to read a lot of these, and the quicker you can get to your point and the most incisively, the better. And you can't do that unless you do this whole growing and pruning thing. If you don't grow and prune, if you don't iterate a little bit, your language will not be sharp and succinct. It'll be like shaggy and incomprehensible. You'll probably understand it because you wrote it, but you're not going to be there to explain it to me when I have to read it. But also avoid being terse and vague. I saw a lot of conference proposals that were 1 sentence long. And these are anonymous, so I don't know if they thought they were going to get in on the strength of their name or something. In certain cases, that seemed to work for this conference because there was space for that particular subject. There are a lot of, for example, esoteric programming languages, and people offered introductory sessions on those languages, and they were selected. And I think that's okay. But if you're going to say, and we'll see some examples later, my talk is about monad transformers. I don't know what that means. Like, what about them? What are you going to tell us about them that's new or interesting, or how are you going to present them in a way that's novel or compelling? So succinct and sharp, but not terse and vague, if you can see the distinction there. Likewise, avoid being voluminous. I got some voluminous, lengthy, distended, bloated proposals, and I got lost in them. They might have had a point, but I couldn't tell because they just made me tired. And again, I'm not the one who selected the program for this conference, but I did talk to the people who selected them, and we had some areas of agreement. I don't want to read voluminous, and I don't need excessive detail. I don't need defenses. I just want to know what you're going to say, how and why, very quickly. You're not more convincing just because you're lengthier. So even less often than doing it in advance, people don't proofread their work. And the best reason to proofread your work is because it makes you look more professional. You'd be surprised how many of the proposals I read they had all kinds of grammatical problems and punctuation problems. And for people who are not native speakers of English, I can understand some of that, but why not have someone edit it for you, or ask for advice from somebody? I mean, I know that's a sensitive topic, but you're trying to get into a conference that this is a very generous conference in my experience. In my academic world, nobody pays for you to go to a conference to give a talk. You're just expected to do it, and you pay for it. And this is amazing that you have this resource. So you should respect that people are going to give you money to fly to a place to give a talk on a subject. At least show that you've put some thought and effort into your work. It just looks sloppy and like you did it at the last minute, which maybe you did, if you don't go through the trouble to proofread it. One mistake, two mistake, a typo, fine. If the whole thing is just sloppy, it doesn't like sell you as a speaker. It's going to make me think that you're not going to be prepared for the actual talk because you didn't prepare for this like paragraph of words. Get feedback. I think very few people do this because they're probably embarrassed. I understand, but you have nothing to gain by being shy in this process. Go into Slack, go into IRC, talk to your colleagues, coworkers, friends, family members. I highly recommend you show your work to people who are not in your field, because if you can explain if you can get your point across to someone who's not a specialist in what you do, then you've succeeded. Your coworkers, if they can understand it, that's also good. I mean, it's certainly bad if they can't, but you also want this to be comprehensible to any reader whatsoever. Going back to not doing this the night before, don't do it all at once either. Do it slowly. Like I said, give yourself time. You should definitely work on this over a period of time so that literally you're sleeping between periods of time that you're working on it. I don't know, something happens in your brain. I talk to my students in writing classes all the time that somehow you can think about a thing, you work on it a little bit, you go to bed, you wake up, and suddenly the problem, like your brain solved the problem for you overnight. I mean, I think your brain does that. You collect a lot of information during the day, and it's like too much to really process all at once. And you go to sleep, and your brain says, "This is important. Throw all that away," and then things come together. And I don't know. You've probably all experienced that. I don't know how it works. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do know that I have generally succeeded more in my writing when I've slept on it, and then I've woken up and I thought, oh, now I know more like what I want to say. I already said don't do it at the last minute. Okay. I don't know why programmers in particular think that they need to be clever in their proposals and make like little jokes or be witty. You're not funny, you're not cute, you're not clever, you're not witty, you're just wasting my time. I'm tired, I want to get through this process, I'm not doing it for fun. Maybe I don't even know why your joke is supposed to be funny. Just be direct and to the point, okay? If you're a comedian, it's your job to be funny. If you're a programmer, it's your job to tell me how your technology project works or why I should care about it. And the problem with trying to be funny is if it backfires hard. So, just don't do it. And don't think you're going to sell yourself by being funny either. Like, oh, I'm this casual dude who's going to convince people to take my proposal seriously because I have wit. No, doesn't work on me. I don't think it works on anybody else either. Likewise, don't show off. Don't write your proposal in a way that just makes it seem like you're bragging or boasting, or you use like lots of big words or fancy terminology. If you're the only one who understands what you're talking about, I mean, maybe you're impressive, but I mean, what is the point of going to a conference and just intimidating people or intimidating the readers of the committee? Don't assume your readers will be familiar with your topic. I don't know who's on the committee, actually, but I'm pretty sure that they are not all experts in Scala, Clojure, Haskell, and Lisp, and Erlang, and whatever else. Your proposal will only succeed on its own merits as a piece of communication, not because you are so specific about the technology that you're presenting on that someone in the committee is going to be like, oh, I know exactly what this person is saying. We definitely have to choose them. That's generally not going to work. It might in certain cases where what you're working on is rather well known even to people who aren't specialists. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I would go for a general readership, right? Just general communicability is really fine and your best bet. You don't have to be so impressive that you're assuming deep familiarity. It's okay to use terms that are appropriate. But remember, again, know your audience. We just want to get through these things, and we want to know what you're talking about as quickly as possible. I said before that I'm not going to be there with you when I'm reading your proposal for you to explain it to me. Keep that in mind, right? I don't know what you're trying to say. I'm pretty clever as a reader. I can sometimes intuit what people are trying to say, maybe. But I really can't read your mind, so you have to spell things out. And a lot of the language I've read is kind of evasive, and I'm having to guess what it is they really want to do, or there's just not much there. It's so brief as to be kind of useless to me. And the thing is, I'm going into this with like total good faith. I want every proposal to be good. Why we want only good proposals, right? I would love to have 100 good proposals to choose from, than like 90 bad ones and 10 good ones, but I have to pick 40 for the conference. I mean, that's not a situation anybody wants to be in. I'm not saying that's how it worked out with this one either. I would never release those numbers. I think I already said this. Don't use sophisticated language or excessive amounts of jargon, especially the jargon. I know you programmers have your own specialized ways of speaking to each other and your own little argots and so forth. That's okay. I just wouldn't do too much of it. Don't try to sound pompous. Don't try to sound smart. Generally, people who try to sound smart in their writing fail because they don't actually know how to do it. So again, be safe. Don't try to sound smart. Clear, simple, direct is always the most successful strategy in these kinds of situations. Jargon, I know some of it is necessary, but I maybe don't use more than is necessary. Might be a good way to put that. I've said evasive a couple times now. So diffident, by diffident I mean don't write your proposal in a way that you're so sort of nervous about coming across like don't worry about being arrogant. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. You're not being arrogant by being direct. I've read a lot of proposals that sort of dance around a subject, and I've spoken to the people who've written them, not in tech circumstances per se, but in my work in literature, and they felt that they couldn't just come right out and say something because they didn't want to. I don't know. They had some kind of like psychodrama going on in their minds. Like they didn't want to seem like they were overstepping their bounds or whatever. Don't worry about that. You're going to be far more appreciated if you're direct. I appreciate direct. Like, oh, I know what they want to say. Great. You don't have to write in an arrogant way. Just be direct. If you're not direct, I'm just not going to know what you're talking about. I'm not going to think, oh, this is a good person. They are respecting the fact that I don't like people who act like they know what they're talking about. I live in Berlin, Germany. I didn't fly to Boulder, Colorado to listen to people talk who don't know what they're talking about, ideally. Also, don't be obfuscatory, but don't write in such a way that you're concealing what it is you're actually going to do, right? You're so afraid of being direct that you're just doing all this like verbal jujitsu to avoid coming right out and saying what you want to say. I mean, I do that sometimes myself. That generally is the kind of writing that will happen when you're just doing a first draft. My first draft writing is evasive, diffident, and obfuscatory, right? Because I don't know what I want to say yet. And I told you, start writing before you know what you want to say. And then you go through the process, and you end up with the thing that can actually be given to somebody else because it is comprehensible to somebody else. Don't use passive voice. I hope you know the difference between active voice and passive voice. Everybody uses passive voice all the time. I hate it. We all should hate it. There are like some rare instances where it's fine, but I would like to know what you are going to do in your proposal, and who is the performer of any given action. So the passive voice, if it's used excessively, generally just comes across as weakness, I would say. Yeah.
So you would say the passive voice is used by programmers excessively?
That's funny. Yeah. Well, no. You know what? No. Everybody. You know what? You know who uses passive voice excessively? Engineers, because many of them are taught to do it. There are genres of writing in which you're taught to use passive voice for certain reasons, but in this kind of writing, I don't think it's effective. Yeah. Well, I didn't know it either until I had to teach engineers. And they told me that this is how they're taught to write, and I had to say, don't do it in this course.
Definitely when we're writing, say, our academic research proposals, we want to be active.
Yeah.
It is very tricky because you're not supposed to use, well, there's sort of the big issue of like what pronoun use is acceptable in academic writing, whether or not you have to royally everything, like whether you have to like use one as your only sort of indirection of talking about people. Yeah, and so passive voice is a way of evading pronouns.
Yeah, and you know what? Yeah, and you know what? This is not writing for publication, generally speaking. I'm used to submitting for conferences and that don't publish the final results. I mean, obviously for this conference they did. I don't know if they'll do that again. I think it was different last year. But yeah, the pronoun thing is tricky. You just have to figure out your own way through that. For something that's not for public consumption, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, it's probably not as big a deal in this situation than it might be elsewhere. Don't be casual. Take it seriously. Be professional. Be serious. I read a lot of casual proposals. Again, I feel like maybe certain people think that they're going to get onto the conference schedule because they come across as friendly. Maybe I don't know what it is actually. Maybe they're just young. I don't know. I'm going to talk about closure spec. It's going to be cool. It's the coolest. I know programmers like to say everything is awesome. That's the first thing I noticed when entering this field. Everything's awesome.
Have you seen the subgenre of like awesome and then it's about some topic and it's just like film? Have you seen that? Oh yeah. Let me show you after.
I like Haskell. I mean, is it awesome? I guess it depends. Like, sex is awesome. Food is awesome. I don't know if functors are awesome. I mean, they're definitely handy.
Awesome in the way that God is awesome in terms of you can make a great people on stuff.
Yeah, it's a different kind of awesome. Don't be negative, right? JavaScript sucks, as we all know. So I'm going to write about how we can actually do JavaScript better because we all hate JavaScript. I mean, yeah, perhaps we might share that sentiment, but you never know who's going to be on a committee and who is not going to either appreciate what you have to say along those lines, disagree with you, or who might agree with you but just doesn't want a negative talk, right? Your talk should generally be positive. Not because it's better to be positive than negative. It's just like your talk should be like contributing, not detracting. Like you don't learn anything or you're not teaching anything by simply saying this one thing is terrible and your thing is better. I mean, that's maybe your opinion or you're just being judgmental. But again, I think everything I've said so far, I've tried to point you toward being safe, like, right? Clear, direct, simple, brief, succinct, sharp, and positive. I'm going to do this thing, not tear down this other thing. Actually happens a lot in academia where people don't really have their own idea, so they just attack somebody else's idea. I don't think it's terribly productive. You can use it to build a career maybe, but not in a good way. Don't be afraid to ask for help. When I put this slide in here, the point I wanted to make about it was don't be afraid to ask for help from the conference organizers. Specifically, if you have some notion that you'd like to give a talk, but you don't feel like you know what you want to say, or especially if you don't feel like you're qualified, just contact somebody at the conference and tell them that and ask them, how can I do the best job presenting at this conference or writing a proposal? What are you looking for? Can I have help? I'm sure they will help you. Of course, don't be afraid to ask for help from your colleagues and your peers and your family members, as I said before. But definitely reach out to the conference organizers. I mean, if there's a specific conference you know you want to present at, like I said, they would rather have 100 good proposals to choose from than 90 bad ones and 10 good ones, but still have to pick 40. So they will go out of their way to help you. I would think they would go out of their way to help you come up with something that's positive. I'm gonna close the slides portion with just some. I said a lot of don't things. Now I'm gonna say some positive things. Be confident, and don't be afraid to be confident in your writing. Let your writing convey the most confident part of you, even if you feel like you aren't a confident person. I'm not always a confident person. I'm not a professional developer, and I'm speaking at a programming conference, and I don't think I could have done that if I didn't just like put my ego aside and say, okay, here's the subject I'm going to talk about. Here's what I'm going to say. Here's why. Here's how. You know, and then let them decide, right? It's the job of the committee to determine whether or not your proposal is either good enough to qualify for inclusion, or maybe it's good enough, but it doesn't fit into the sort of program that they're trying to put together. So if you can, and I know this is tricky, put the anxieties aside. And if you follow the process that I've described, then you can. If you do everything at the last minute, you do it all at once, you don't sort of iterate, you don't have a process, then your personality is going to leach into your writing more. And all of your anxieties are going to leach into your writing more. But if you just follow a process and iterate and sharpen and hone, then you can actually get to the real nugget of what it is you want to communicate. And that will be a form of confidence, right? That directness is the confidence. Finally, I said at the very beginning, know your audience. The whole time you're doing this, just remember your audience. Keep your audience in mind. Your writing is meant to serve them, right? You're not doing this for your own glorification. You're doing this for somebody else, right? It's communication. That's all I have to say about slides. I have some examples that we can look at, but I think I'm going to stop for questions. But I think John maybe would like to offer some thoughts about this himself. What makes a successful conference proposal in your experience? I wasn't on the committee, so you'll have more direct intuition here.
Yeah, so fortunately I came in.
Oh. Okay.
Fortunately, I came in a bit late, so I didn't catch all this. But I've chatted with Stephen before, and Stephen, as he probably let you know, he went through and painstakingly edited 150 different proposals, right? Somewhere.
I forget. It was traumatizing.
It was traumatizing. And these ranged from sort of very, very good proposals, very solid, that didn't need much help at all, to ones that were almost irredeemable. It was really a struggle to extract out a proposal from some of these. And we did this as just part of the cleanup process, because we want to make sure that if English is not your first language, or if you have some trouble with English grammar or spelling or just organizing, that we sort of put the best possible face on that proposal before it goes on to the committee. And this is also where we do like gender anonymization and removing personally identifiable names and things like that. And it really is interesting because you can watch proposals travel all the way from the beginning of the pipeline to the very end. You can see which ones catch committee members' eyes. And it's hard to say exactly why they choose winning proposals, but I will say this, it does come down to, I'd say, probably more than 50%, maybe even more than 70%, comes down to not the idea that is being discussed inside the proposal, but the way in which it is described. And that's really important. If you're trying to get into conferences and events, then you need to pay a lot of attention to that proposal, because sometimes even the most like elementary idea with a really good proposal will get in and get committee members fired up, even if it's something that's sort of been talked about to death. But if it's described in a way that is exciting, and a way that's positive, and a way that's really clear and really sharp, and there's a takeaway for audience members, they can come in here. It's not just going to be posing a bunch of questions and sort of more philosophical. It's going to be something concrete that they can come in, they can listen to, get fired up about, and then take something home that is going to make them a better software developer. And those tend to be the types of proposals that get in. Also, something I've noticed is positive, upbeat, and I would say even somewhat playful titles and descriptions tend to do better than average with committee members. So I'm not sure that would be true at an academic conference per se, right? But at a conference like LambdaConf, which is like commercial functional programming, and a hobbyist conference, I would say that injecting a little bit of humor or being a little playful with a title and description, sometimes these give you an edge. And I've seen it happen again. There's lots of proposals out there, and if it comes down to one that is very dry and very clearly and well written, but one that's a little sort of fun and playful, the fun and playful win. The fun and playful one will win 9 times out of 10 in my experience, at least for a conference like LambdaConf. And that's because if it sounds interesting, if it sounds exciting, just by reading it, you want it more in the conference than if it's just sort of a stock description copy-pasted from Wikipedia on what lambda calculus is. I mean, it might be a very well-written description of lambda calculus, but if it doesn't sound engaging and energizing and positive and upbeat and like make you want to attend it because you're going to learn something that's super useful, then the odds of it being accepted go down.
That's really interesting because I tend to, I told them, don't try to be funny. Don't try to be witty because it can backfire.
It can backfire, and I've seen it backfire, yeah.
Is there a way of distinguishing maybe between being playful with serious intent and being casual? I felt that the casual ones,
I agree with that.
They were sort of just playful. They didn't really communicate anything.
That's a good distinction to make. So casual versus playful with serious intent. Like you still have to know your stuff.
Yeah, spirited.
You still, yeah, exactly. Yeah, spirited. So spirited.
Or maybe witty.
Witty.
You can pull it off.
Yeah.
If you can pull it off, there's always the danger of it backfiring.
I think a clever title's fine, but your abstract should be like direct, succinct. And if you throw in a joke, you really got down.
Right. Yeah. This is good feedback, so I wouldn't contradict anything said here, but I would say like if you can be serious and communicate all these things that Stephen has talked about, and you can do so in a way that's a little playful or a little witty,
No, and
then
get feedback, and people will tell you if you're being witty or not.
right.
Don't think, oh, I'm definitely funny.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the get to that stage is have somebody else read it and see if it wins.
That's right.
Yeah.
And don't be negative. I would second that. Like, don't write a proposal that all it does is bash other things because, yes.
I can accept that.
I don't know. But actually, yours was top ranked by the committee. It was one of the top choices, I think it was. So, yeah, don't be negative, but at the same time, don't be afraid to be a little controversial. So, for example, if you're going to be arguing that we should all be using statically typed programming languages, then make that point and let the committee know that's what you're going to be saying. Don't be wishy-washy, and that partially goes back to confidence, I think. But also, people would much rather see a strong opinion on something that's sort of well-reasoned, well-thought-out than something that's going to walk the line and you're going to go into that talk thinking the same thing that you did before, and there's not really much to discuss because there were no takeaways out of that. Anything else?
No, I covered everything I wanted to say.
Did you go through some examples?
Not yet.
Okay, so that'd be fun.
We could see if anyone has questions.
Oh yeah, any questions while I'm up here?
Yeah.
All right.
So, I mean, I have room at 11, but I really don't want to be complete. So feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably go through them in about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But I think while John is here, since he's in charge, you should go to the source with some questions, maybe specific to LambdaConf possibly, and then I can offer general help.
Yeah.
So, being that I do live in Colorado and it's rather convenient,
That is
when
nice.
is the call for proposals the next year?
So the call for proposals will open December 1st, and then it will shut down. I should think we shut it down end of February, and we'll probably.
But you don't have to
wait for it to get started. I think
That's right. Some topics are timeless. Like some are sensitive. They depend on languages and stuff like that, new features and new libraries and so forth. But there's a lot of content here at LambdaConf that is totally independent of that. So you get to get started right away and be playing around with it, soliciting feedback and so forth if you're interested.
Yeah, I mean, you know what it's going to be about, right? Functional programming.
Right.
Some conferences
No
have
surprises.
specific themes, but
Right.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
much does being kind of novel or maybe tangential to the subject help or hurt you? Like that neurological talk yesterday was really interesting. It wasn't about functional programming directly.
Yeah.
So like, does that help or does that hurt you? Like being more kind of off topic? Or?
So I would say that being off topic is probably, at least being somewhat off topic, is not going to work against you for a keynote because we have much more flexibility. We never do all pure FP for the keynotes. And even for the other ones, I'd say we accept a certain percent that are off topic. We'll do like up to 10%, I'd say. That's off topic, but still interesting and relevant to software engineers.
Are you putting yourself kind of in a niche where you're competing against more people, or is it actually like maybe there's less there and you have a better shot?
So I would say,
It could be hard to predict, like year to year.
I'd say it's hard to predict, but this is something to keep in mind. So we have different types of talks here at LambdaConf. We have the 6-hour workshops and the 2-hour workshops, the 1-hour educational, 1-hour de novo, and the 10-minute inspire, and then the 40-minute keynotes. And which of those you submitted to had a massive effect on your probability of being accepted. And that's because we determine in advance, roughly, how many of each one of these types we want based on feedback from the last year and ongoing experimentation, and then we'll fill them all up. So if you submitted an educational talk this year, your odds of getting in were not good. And the reason for that, we had so many really, really good educational talks. And I think we had probably 3 times as many as we were accepting. So we accepted a lot, like 24. But we had way more submissions for that topic than necessary. On the other hand, if you submitted a de novo talk, or if you submitted a 6-hour workshop, your odds of getting in was much, much, much higher. So I would say and we encourage people to do this because we don't want your talk not to be accepted just because you are going up against 100 other people for that slot. So we do allow and encourage people to submit up to 3 different submissions. Just because if you really want to talk, diversify and go across categories. Because in my experience from running this for 4 years, the 1-hour talk slot is the most popular. So if you want to maximize your odds of getting in, do stuff that's not 1 hour, because there's going to be fewer people competing for those slots.
This I had not considered, but that actually changes your whole strategy quite a bit. If you can submit up to 3 times, you should. Why not?
Yeah, 3 times the odds of getting in.
Yeah, and you can cover more ground. And also definitely start well in advance if you're going to try to do that. In my world, you can't. You can submit 1 talk per conference, right? They don't want this sort of competitive situation or whatever. Plus, the conferences are many magnitudes of times larger. This is an amazing opportunity. I wish I had done it, actually. I only submitted 1.
So it was interesting. In some cases, a person submitted an educational one and ended up in the ranking, at position 119 or something like that. So they would never be accepted. But they also happened to submit an Inspire talk, which ended up at slot number 7. So they got in anyway. And that happened in a number of cases, actually. All right, any other questions before I turn it back over to Stephen?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
How many keynotes were submitted proposals?
I would say probably between 10 and 12. So not tons of keynotes tend to be submitted, so that tends to be less competitive. Although if we look at a keynote description and it doesn't seem like it has general applicability, like it doesn't seem like keynote material, we might not consider it. Yeah.
I think Johnston is next. Are we shifting the schedule forward to the keynote right over?
Yeah, so I'm going to take off, but you said, Sean, you don't mind if he runs into yours a bit. Okay, all right. So I'm going to take off. I'm going to attend another session. A fun thing to do, if you can talk Stephen into it might be to like collaboratively, like sit down and write down a proposal.
Yeah.
Like on something that.
Yeah.
No.
Thank you for dropping the I want more interesting things to read too. Yeah. And that's great practice.
Yeah, and I thought if I were to spend your conference, I would probably just take a talk that I already given at a meetup or something and propose that.
Yeah.
How often, what percentage of the time are people just presenting proposal and then later working on the presentation, figuring out from scratch versus having already put something together? Not necessarily as representative, but
I mean, I have no way of knowing that, but I can tell you from my experience that the proposal is the hardest part. Once you're in, that's kind of what matters. Of course, it's important that you prepare for the presentation itself. Many people wait, unfortunately, many people will wait until the last minute to even start working on it. There's a joke among professors that you actually write your paper on the flight to the conference. And that does, yeah, we've all been to, talks that could have been better. I don't have statistics for you, but I think it's a good idea. I mean, you don't have to have the whole definitely you should not have the whole presentation already worked out before you write the proposal. Because if you don't get accepted, what's the point? Write the proposal, then develop the material. And then definitely, yeah, present at a meetup and work on it. I think that's great. You should practice it. Everyone should practice if they can. Okay, I'm happy to take a few more questions, but I thought maybe since we have a little bit of extra time, thank you very much, we could look at a few examples. If you'd like to do that, we don't have to. Would you like to look at examples? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, sure. Yep. So read this. By the way, these slides are all on GitHub. So raise your hand if you think that this one was accepted. And raise your hand if you think it was not accepted. It was accepted. It can be so hard to know, really, because there are a lot of factors that go into selecting proposals, and many good ones are ultimately rejected. This one, I think, does a pretty good job because it's short and succinct, and it tells me what the workshop is going to accomplish. I probably could use a little bit more detail myself. This is only one part of like the larger proposal, obviously, but I think it is very clear, communicative, vibrant language for a proposal. I take away immediately what it's all about. So I think it represents well what it's trying to accomplish.
I was going to say a couple of
Sure. Yeah. What?
things that stood out to me that I would explain. This small but neat. What does neat mean? Neat is
Yeah, true. That could be vague.
orderly
Yeah.
or
Or cool. Yeah.
cool, which is
Yeah,
not very
yeah.
good when you throw it in. Or and then definite. I would pick up. We'll definitely have a better understanding.
Yeah, and I personally have a pet peeve about rhetorical questions, but that's my problem, right? You know, if I see 5 of them in a row, then I think that's an issue with the writer. 1 I can tolerate, but you know, we're not looking for perfection necessarily. You're not wrong about what you say, but compared to many other proposals, this one, you know, I think it does well, and it's reasonable. I think what it wants to achieve. How about this one? Raise your hand if you think this one was accepted. And raise your hand if you think it was not. Yeah, see, this is not just me telling you what I think. Good, bad. Not accepted. This is not, by the way, I'm not showing you actual proposals that were rejected. The ones that were accepted are the real thing. The ones rejected, they are inspired by real ones. I changed some of the wording around. I don't want to embarrass anybody. I think I just said I don't like rhetorical questions, but even despite that, I don't know what this person's going to try to achieve in this talk at all. Does anybody have any idea? This could be, you know, you could spend an entire day on this subject. This is a tricky one. Raise your hand if you would accept this. Raise your hand if you would not. If you would not. Yeah, you know what? It was like half and half. And I think that that's a good response because this seems so short as to be useless. On the other hand, it does say what it's going to do, and it is a cutting edge topic. So I think it really depends. A version of this was accepted, I think. And I think it was accepted because of what it is, the topic it's trying to cover. I mean, if this were a hands-on introduction to C++, I don't think it would have succeeded. And also maybe the type of slot it was meant to fit into. I don't think that this is a good proposal at all, personally. I think much more, the writer could have said much more about what was going to happen in the session. But sometimes, the thing is, sometimes you will succeed with something like this because you have maybe a hot topic. I don't know, I always go for the safe bet. You know, do your best possible job is always going to be more likely to succeed than just hoping that you're lucky. Yes?
Real quick on the last one, these descriptions, these become the sort of synopsis or summary on the website too for people.
Yeah, the ones that were accepted, you will find them on the website.
And I guess mean to say, like, that's another thing that makes these types of talks difficult for me to justify going to see. There's a lot of good stuff here, and if I see something like that, I'm not going to attend it.
Yeah, because you don't know what it means. Yeah, that's a very good point, right? If these make it into the descriptions, you have to think about conference attendees themselves. Now, that's part of the process of LambdaConf, right? How they go about putting material. I mean, personally, I didn't know that my submission materials was going to be like on the website publicly. I thought I was just writing for the conference committee. So that's probably something that we'll talk about. But yeah, the descriptions should be compelling in order to attract an audience, right? Nobody wants to show up to a room. Well, I mean, essentially a room like this. For an unconference, it's fine. If you're giving an actual scheduled talk, it would not be good. How about this one?
Well, this is one where I sort of recollect there being a comment on this. So.
Well, nevertheless, I mean, we can just say, okay, raise your hand if you like this proposal, if you think it's well written. You think it's too long? Yeah, so yeah, raise your hand if you like it. Yeah, I like it. This was for a 6-hour workshop, so that's an interesting point. Where? Oh, will be covered. Will be covered. I think there's only one. Will be covered. Will be examined. Despite that, I think this is pretty good. Should I say pretty good for a tech conference?
The meat of the workshop versus the speakers,
Pardon?
The meat of it, or the measurement, the workshop versus the speakers, as though like the room or sort of the occasion will be teaching things. But that's a subtlety
that it might be the product of my editing because I had to remove all like pronouns and things from these. I don't remember about this one. Yeah, I'm not saying this is a perfect piece of writing. I think it communicates well what it's trying to accomplish, despite grammatical quirks. I definitely recommend smoothing those things out. But I read this and I know what I'm expected to achieve. And in fact, I went to this workshop, so that's why I picked it. Here we go. How about this one? Raise your hand if you think this is good. Would you go to this talk? Raise your hand if you would go to this talk. You like monad transformers. Nobody would go. Maybe? Yeah, I don't think this is good. And the proposal upon which it was based was not accepted. And I want to be constructive. I don't want to just say it wasn't good. Why isn't it good? Well, I know what a monad transformer is, but a talk about why it's useful and what its drawbacks are, as well as how it is represented in various programming languages, that sounds like a very large topic to me. I don't know how you could reasonably achieve that in a short amount of time. That's very ambitious, yeah.
So my concept
Yeah.
is already are going to see that, and they're not going to see anything interesting that they could learn from it, and they're not going to want to
I think,
know it.
yeah.
People who don't know anything, there's no motivating factor for them to learn about what it is.
Yeah, and I don't want to impute motive to anybody, but this to me just seems a little bit lazy, right? I know about monad transformers, so I'll just talk about that. You know, pick one monad transformer and tell me something clever you can do with it that I had not thought of before. Maybe that would be useful. Or tell me about I/O, please. You know. Okay. How about that one? You thought the Yesod one was long. Okay. Me too. You do? So what do you think of this one? Seriously? Raise your hand if you think it's good. Raise your hand if not. Half and half. What are you in doubt about?
The approach that you're going. I mean, so it seems like it's a good pitch, right? But it doesn't necessarily say how he's going or how this person is going to do that necessarily, right? I mean, it kind of touches on it, but I think for somebody that was new to functional programming, it would be more. You kind of throw something in there saying like, this is what I'm going to use, and this is what you will learn. So this is like a what, but more how is the missing a how.
Yeah, I guess for beginners, maybe that second sentence would be a little bit hard to remember, I guess. It starts off with saying, participants will develop an intuition for functional programming fundamentals, and then the second sentence throws in a ton of jargon, which may help people off. That's just my opinion.
This one's longer than the one that I said was long, but it feels more succinct in the verbiage.
Okay, so I wrote this, and I think your comments are on target, actually. I actually do think I managed to come up with something succinct. I think I even may have made it playful a little bit in the way that John was saying. But I also don't think that you're wrong about the second sentence. Thing is, I didn't really know well how to target it. I know much better now. I think I expected beginners at a functional programming conference to be much better prepared for this kind of presentation than maybe they really are. Having gone through that experience, I'll certainly know better for the next time. Like for the jargon, for example. Like to me, I thought, well, this is like, maybe it's not like jargon because it's very well known, but if you're saying that it could be off-putting to a beginner, then that's meaningful. So I need to think about that sort of, if I'm pitching to beginners next time, I need to think about that more carefully. Anyway, I thought it would be fair for me to show my own work since I'm criticizing everybody else's. And you know what? I also need feedback, and you know, I crave it. Anyway, it's not about me. We'll do, I'm butting up against my extra 15-minute mark, but how about this one? This probably looks very familiar, right? Yeah. This is the description of the keynote. So we can look at it as a keynote description. Okay, I thought this was good because what does the brain of a programmer look like while coding? Like, well, that's interesting. That alone makes it interesting to me, right, at a conference like this. But I don't know. Does anyone else have any comments? Obviously, it was accepted.
This is like actually a good use of a rhetorical question because there's a lead up to it explaining the question being asked.
Yeah, leading to the question, right? It's presenting the question for discussion. It's not, have you ever wondered what the brain of a programmer looks like while coding?
Well, it's not a rhetorical question.
Yeah, in that sense. Yeah.
I mean, it is a research thing, though.
Yeah.
It's not a rhetorical question. Like, it is meant to be answered.
Right. And the talk is meant to answer the question, not simply It is not simply meant, right, the rhetorical question would be like win you over as the reader of the paragraph through this rhetorical device. But actually, no, the topic of this talk will be answering this question. So I thought that was effective. Okay, this one's kind of long. You don't have to read all of it. This is very much based on a real submission. So raise your hand if you think this is a good proposal. You like it, you would go to this talk. Raise your hand if you even know what it's talking about. It's nonsense, right? I wrote this too. I wrote it deliberately to be nonsense because I had one, maybe two proposals that read exactly like this. Again, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but this is just a whole bunch of words that don't add up to anything at all. It was actually very hard to write. Yeah.
I do think there's some value in the last sentence, but
there's no value in any of it because I'm telling you.
What I'm saying is that if, say, the speaker were to like elaborate what part of functional programming or what do they do, like in the
okay. So, and the proposal I based this on did do that, and I think that's a useful observation. Even though I was deliberately trying to be, I was trying to obfuscate. The thing, I managed to hook you anyway, right? Like, oh, there's at least one thing in this, right? You know, you did something useful in your company with a technology, and actually a lot of people come here for that, right? Especially given the reputation of FP. What can I do that's practical in work? If only this proposal had said more about that, that might have been a winner, right? Fine, I think this is the last one. Okay, we'll do these quickly. I'll just say that this maybe, to me, is an obvious case of one that's kind of negative. Like it doesn't really pitch itself as how it's going to contribute. It just sort of detracts. And you know, even that notwithstanding, I think it's a little bit vague. I will explain the underlying mathematical concepts. I mean, that sounds a little bit scary, to be honest, but also that could go in any number of directions. I don't really know what it's going to be about. And you know what, to Joe's point, I don't even know why I would go to this. It's not really good marketing.
Another point of view for the conference, for you putting on the conference, this could be like, there's a lot of different directions this talk could go in that don't end up constructive for anybody attending.
Yeah.
So they're potentially burning an hour at the time that they host someone to talk about this.
Yeah.
Well, in a sense, I think there's also kind of an issue here that if you're going to write this sort of proposal, then you need to really strongly believe that this is something that the reviewers will just get on board with. Like that the idea that people have all these false beliefs is something that's generally accepted.
Yeah.
Or that might even occur to the reviewers as reasonable.
Or just drop down to what is the pain of holding false beliefs about these other brain effects?
We're not even talking about beliefs, you know? Why, you know,
yeah. The thing is like this says that correct mistakes and false beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is the pain that is caused by those mistakes and false beliefs? That's something that can draw somebody in. Solve a pain point for them.
Yeah, that could actually make an interesting keynote, but even the way you described it is sort of better than this negative presentation, I think.
Right.
I'm not sure I would go to it anyway. The math references scare me a little bit, but I'm sure that's not the case for everybody. How about this one? This is the last one. And again, raise your hand if you think this is a good proposal.
So did this have a previous paragraph telling us anything about the GraphQL?
Actually, I don't, you know, every proposal had maybe 10 paragraphs, and I just picked the introduction to focus on, because that to me should capture the essence of it. I actually don't think, it's a good point, I don't think it did. it just assumes that GraphQL is very well known. Do you think that that's a drawback?
I do think it's a drawback. Just, I mean, I'm not like the most knowledgeable person about everything going on in the web.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a web thing, and you can't assume everybody's a web developer. That's a good point. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Otherwise, though, I thought this is pretty good, personally. I mean, it was accepted. I think it, despite not explaining what GraphQL is, I suppose for those who do know what it is, it explains its purpose very well, what it's going to do. And you know what? I think what I like best about it is that the language is simple. It's not jargony. It's comprehensible. It's clean. I think it's a clean, elegant piece of writing, which is, as much as you can ask for in a conference proposal. I hope there's some agreement on that. Well, yeah. All right, this is the list of all of the slides at the beginning in case you wanted it all in one place. And these slides are available on GitHub, right there, easy to find. If there are any other questions, please just grab me afterward if you happen to have any, or you can stay in touch, and I don't mind helping you with your writing at some point in the future. Otherwise, I'm very sorry to have taken up some of your time, but thank you very much for that. Yeah, and thank you all for attending.